Well, I grew up as a country boy on the farm, raised down the cotton fields. We didn't have a lot to do that, like people do today.
Graduated from high school in June '43, turned 18 in July, and by September they had me already in service.
Took my physical with my brother, who was 2 years older than I. We both drafted the same day and went through the physical line together in Camp Blanding, Florida.
My name is Ward Edmund Ziske, and I am the command historian for the 88th Readiness Division. When the 88th was called to active service on July 15th, 1942 at Camp Gruber, it was draftees mostly from the Northeast. And of course, John Sloan was the commanding general. John Sloan was a disciplinarian, very hard charger, and so that is one reason for the success of the 88th.
In the early 30s, we were experiencing depression in America. But in Europe, they were experiencing a real shakeup, of political groups wanting power, especially in Germany, because Germany had not recovered from the anger that they had from World War I. And that was a seed laid for any dictator to come in and kind of talk them into, for the glory of the country, for the Third Reich, we want to be built up again, we want to be the Third Rome, and so forth. So that was Hitler. And he came to power as a result of the discontent and the grievances, of his own people.
They actually declared war on the United States on December 11th, 1940.
It doesn't seem real that Italy was ever our enemy.
The Italian campaign started in September 1943. It ends on May 2nd, 1945. It's long, and it's a long slog, uphill, downhill, and it's a secondary theater. It's robbed of men and equipment for other theaters. And most people don't understand about Italy, their role in the war.
At the same time, I was down in southern Italy. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I wasn't dreading it either, Well, we landed in Naples.
At a staging area in Naples, trucks, ambulances, jeeps, tanks, half-tracks, and other battle equipment are ready for quick loading in the grand strategy to smash the Nazi European fortress.
I went straight to Naples, and I was in a 100-ship convoy going over, and only 2 of them, all freighters, with escorts, and only 2 of them had a few soldiers in it. The rest of them they hid us. In other words, they had us hid. We had a few submarine alerts, and they had spotted what they thought was a periscope. Half the time I think it was a porpoise, but anyway, these escorts would run around these destroyers and drop a few depth bombs and all. But then we were hit by the enemy right past the Rock of Gibraltar by dive bombers and torpedo bombers.
And when I got on the boat, it was 18 days later, I landed in Naples, Italy. And the docks were, of course, bombed out, but there was a sunken ship laying on its side. And we come up and anchored right there with a runway down and walked across the hull of the ship to another runway to get on to the dock.
On the boat going across the Mediterranean, I was supposed to have been helping in the kitchen, but I was too sick. I just laid up and I hoped for the best.
There were three factions that were vying for control of the country. They had a figurehead king. His name was King Victor Emmanuel III. Okay, but the power did not really reside in him. It was in Parliament and the Prime Minister. When Mussolini came to power, he formed his own fascist party. That's what they were called, the fascists. There was an underground that are called the partisans in Italy, who were patriotic Italians that didn't want to have anything to do with the Nazis, the fascists, the communists, any of those. They were what we would call, your common everyday citizens who were very, very strong, very courageous because of the things that they had to do during the war to try to liberate the country until the Allies got there.
One of them would have a German gun, another one an American gun, another one something else, a British, whatever he could get his hands on.
My mother and father had 7 children. Roland was in the Pacific. Henry was in the Pacific. He was on Leyte. And Ken was in Germany.
We joined maneuvers that the 31st Division was there already. We was responsible for building bridges and to assist the infantry on. We didn't spend just a day or two there. We shipped on up, joined the infantry of the 88th Division. And from there, we just hopped from this mountain range to that one.
So I trained at Camp Wheeler, Georgia to be a motor mechanic. And my division, the 88, was in one campaign before I joined it as a replacement. And I joined them near Anzio and followed the troops through Rome one day after. And that was quite an experience for a young guy from Georgia that never been anywhere. I think I had been out of the county once in my life before I was drafted in the Army.
Mussolini was a man who was very ambitious, cruelly so. A lot like Hitler, he did not care what he had to do to gain power to get where he wanted to go. Even to the point that he would promise the moon to the Italian people and then say, when I get in power, if they so choose to let me have power, then I can do anything that I want. And he was ruthless as much as the Germans were. He had a group of men underneath him called the Black Shirts who would go into homes and do the unthinkable, to people, and you didn't know if you were going to be a victim of that or not.
The 88th was the first draftee division to see combat. They were first known as the Cloverleaf Division. The Axis Sally, German propagandists, gave them the name, called them those Blue Devils. They don't fight like gentlemen. And so that's what stuck. March 5th, 1944 is when the whole division went online. So Anzio had been going on since January of 44. Close to 15,000 men was put into the line about 5 March 1944. One of the things also that was emphasized in the 88th was physical fitness. So they were able to cover a lot of ground fast on foot. Well, they had a great combat record. there was speculation that, what are these guys going to be like? Is this going to be a success? And it was. It was a unique training for the 88th in the Atlas Mountains of Tunisia before they went to Italy. Because they were the first new division added to the 5th Army for the Rome-Arno campaign.
Well, this book, we found it not terribly long ago, and it's called The Road to Rome. It evidently was kind of a souvenir type book. And it chronicles everything that the 5th Army did from the landing there at Naples and the difficulties they encountered. This picture here is of my father. He's the one right here on the pole. He was a Signal Corps guy, and that's, when I saw that, it was just wow. But typical of my father, it was something that it wasn't treasured to him, because evidently he let my older brother draw in it and do some doodling, and there's some pictures that have been kind of colored a little bit. Yeah, this is my father's identification papers. So it shows him as he came in as a private. He ended up coming out as a sergeant. Has his fingerprints, his address, height and weight. It stayed in his pocket for 4 years of difficulty. Hanging around his neck, his dog tags. Think about all the places this has been, and the times that it must have been just jumping out of his shirt. His heart was beating so fast. Made it through it. Well, you know why that's chipped. You know why that notch is there. You put it between the soldier's teeth and you shove it in there, so when he's dead, they can ID him.
Anytime we were back anywhere away from very dangerous, the kids would come with their buckets and all for us to give them scraps. Well, we learned, and I learned later, that compared to the Germans, the Americans were very, very generous. Because I know all of the guys I knew would always get extra so they'd have some left. And these little kids would come up, and some of them would be young ladies and boys with their something to put their food in. And no matter what you gave them or how much, they put it all in that bucket and carried it, would not take one bite of it till they got home and let their parents try to make a meal out of it.
Then we was fighting our way up the Boot, and we fought all the way up into the Apennines Mountains. And as we got up onto Mount Battaglia, that's where I caught my shrapnel in the butt. Believe it or not, that's where my Purple Heart wears.
Hundreds of thousands of men are dying, and their wives and their daughters are in the factories, doing the jobs that they were doing 5-10 years earlier.
And I do solemnly swear
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the United States of America.
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the United States of America.
And that I will serve them honestly and faithfully against all their enemies whomsoever.
And that I will serve them honestly and faithfully against all their enemies whomsoever.
That I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me.
That I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me.
More recruits arriving every day for WWII training at Des Moines, Daytona, Oglethorpe, Devens, Polk, and other centers. More women to be trained, more women to become efficient soldiers behind the soldiers at the front.
They were moving on too. We were pushing them, but they had those old artilleries that we called them screaming Nemes. They had them so cut, and to when they soaring through the air, they made a curious sound. You know, you know one was coming, and you don't know where it's going.
The engineers had a big job in Italy because it was so mountainous, which meant that the Germans had their pick of defensive terrain, and so they would be on the high spots so they could look down. Well, also they knew the choke points. Even though you can get soldiers over the mountains, there's some equipment that's got to use the roads. So the Germans were blowing bridges. They were blowing roads, basically cratering roads. You know, you get some of those hairpin curves, you blow it up, and then it has to be filled in.
The engineers meet up with an old story. The retreating enemy has blown up every bridge in sight. You can't build bridges while hostile guns still bark on the opposite shore. So the engineer assault boats have to bring our infantry across to secure a bridgehead. Quickly, rafts built by the engineers take heavy vehicles and weapons across to help back up the foot soldier.
You know, the British don't have their teeth. We could see a portion of the battlefield from where we were stationed. The next morning, everywhere's a little wisp. Each one of them had his little sack of tea, his little Bunsen burner, and a little pot to make his tea. About 10 o'clock every morning, they had their tea. Well, here we looked out, and here's these crisp autumn day, you know, and here's this little wisp of smoke all over everywhere. And they had gotten out on the side of their foxhole and was making their tea. The Germans had shelled them. Back in the hole they'd go. When the shelling stopped, they popped right out. They finally convinced the Germans, I reckon, that it was useless to shell them. Somewhere near close to noon, they had their tea.
They were glad that the Allies were there, and they were super duper to the American people. They were there during the occupation and everything.
We were following along, all in vehicles, trying to stay up, chasing the Germans. We had just about put them on foot at the Po by blowing out all the bridges at the Po Valley. And we put a squad through them and bottled up the Brenner Pass. They were just strung out along the roads, and we were right behind them, most in vehicles, and they would leave behind a little detail, shoot a few times at our boys, and then leave, and we'd just go right behind them. So we put a quad through them right quick and bottled up the pass.
The Germans were very adept at laying mines, which would have to be swept and cleared. So that's another job the engineers did.
Our outfit, being in combat engineers, we had clear mines and lay mines. We didn't do much laying mines because we were going forward, and no use of laying mines behind us.
When you're in a hostile country, you're always under observation. You remember the American artillery was superior to the Axis artillery. You know, we would have lost more if it weren't for artillery, because we could shoot a lot of shells at them first before we came at them. And what that did, not only does it cause casualties, but it also causes disruptions of headquarters. So it's hard to move people around, it's hard to convey messages, it cuts telephone wires, things like that. It kills couriers or keeps them undercover. It was very hard for them to command and control on the German side, especially when those big artillery bombardments took place.
Our sergeant would take different ones of us. We had several replacements that went in with me, and they'd take us out one at a time to see how we would perform, of course. And so he took me out this day to repair a broken line. And we were driving along in a Jeep looking at the line. It was laying over where we could see it. And we found it, the brake, but he says, well, let's go up here and turn around. And so he could park on the right side of the road coming back. All of a sudden, he said, hit the ditch. Down it came and missed us. But here come one of our planes right behind him and chasing him, and so they quickly went out of sight. They would divert a little branch into canal to water the grape orchard. There'd be a little ditch running between two columns of grapes. I had to pull my line out from under the first casualty I ever saw that day. But then T.P. Palmer from Boston was my buddy, and we went out. Well, this is the first time we'd heard artillery. Seldom did they just shoot at two guys. They tried to make their ammo more efficient by shooting at larger groups. But I guess they were testing it because they started shooting at us after we repaired the line. So we'd jump in the canal and we'd go a little ways and they'd stop and we'd get out and they'd start shooting at us again. And of course the canal was about so deep and just a trickle of water in it in most places. And so anyway, we wound up crawling in the ditch.
They were fighting a very formidable enemy. The Germans were just throwing everything they could at them. And even though a lot of things were happening on the Western Front, it was just as significant, just as dangerous, just as important, what they were doing in Italy.
The valleys were very, very muddy because basically with the Apennines Mountains, which goes across the whole length of Italy pretty much until you get to the Po Valley. So part of it is just climbing the hills, but also getting through the valleys. If you look at a lot of the pictures of the 88th and other units in Italy, mud. You see a lot of vehicles with tire chains. The terrain was so rough, there's places you just couldn't get trucks or jeeps. And so to supply the men, you had to use mules. They're eventually going to run out of bullets and beams. It's part of sustainment. Needless to say, the Germans that got bypassed, and that happened, because one of the things, because of that mountainous terrain, you could have enemy right next to it. They don't know you're there, and you don't know they're there, because it channelizes people.
We went along behind the troops, started through the mountain, and we were right behind 1st Battalion, right up with old Colonel Fry was an old West Point guy, and he always had to be up close. A lot of them would stay safe, but he wouldn't. And we picked up a battalion of civilians, met him. And of course we had maps, but we never knew how accurate they were and all. So they took this battalion and asked him would he be our guide to a certain point. And he said yes. The colonel said, okay, we'll take this group of buildings over here, and 1st Battalion headquarters would take another group. Well, after they dismissed him and he went on his way, they got to looking at these two sites and discovered that one of them was much larger than the other. So they swapped. We took the smaller house because we were the smaller group. Well, that headquarters group walked into an ambush and was all captured. And except the radio officer jumped out the window with a radio and alerted us of the capture. Well, our bunch was, if they started, it didn't make no difference how many we had. We fought till you either made it or was killed.
Italy is many things to many people. Art, romance, scenery, history. To the Florentine, it is Firenze la Bella, Florence the Beautiful, center of medieval Italian culture and home of Michelangelo.
A bunch of us guys got in there and sat down at a long table, you know, and cut up and this and that. Rose was there to visit her aunt, and she was on the diagonal corner the other way. During the course of the stay there, I'd keep glancing at her, you know, and come to find out she's doing the same to me. And we'd turn her head, you know, didn't want her to know we was bearing down on her. But anyway, that went on for the period that we remained there. Finally, everybody left to go to bed and left me and her there by ourselves.
Most of the men had Italian food on their minds.
I can imagine the first time they made eye contact because he was as handsome as she was beautiful.
I would take off and visit her. And we got pretty close for the time that we were there. So when I had to leave, I felt lonely up there in them snowy mountains, you know. Everything was going pretty smooth as we thought. We pulled into a little settlement area. It wasn't a town, it just looked like some big farm buildings, you know. And we had a truckload of mines that was parked in the midst of the buildings there. And another buddy of mine and the company were in this building where this lady was making spaghetti, you know, like we'd make sausage. Anyway, we was amused by that, and then one say was about 10 or 12 there, and that's the only people in the area. While we was watching that, we heard it was a darndest explosion. The only thing we could ever figure out was the Germans had thrown the artillery in there and hit that truck of mines, and the buildings just collapsed around. And I was buried in it. I don't know what happened to the woman. I heard the kid moaning, you know, and I wasn't out at that particular moment, because I was trying to calm him down. I couldn't see him or nothing, but we were covered. But then that's the last I remembered until we had a bulldozer in the outfit, you see, and they was trying to dig us out. And they finally got down, and I remembered this. I looked up and seen them, you know. Well, they got me out. They bunged me up all over the head. I was bloody. And then when they got me outside, was snow on the ground, you know, but it was black from all that explosion. And there we had 14 members was killed, and about the same number was hospitalized, you know.
I had started up the steps. A shell hit the top of the building, and it was a delayed act shell. And of course we had some land outside too, and get two of my buddies. We heard some of, I guess their observation or something was further up and they were affected, and we heard some yelling. And just as I started up the stairs, second delayed action one, and it went off and took out the stairway and all, and the ceiling of that first floor. And the concussion knocked me all the way back down the steps. Well, that was one of the hardest things I've ever done right then, was making myself go back up them steps. It would have been so easy just to sit down there and been dazed, but I finally convinced myself, because I was hearing hollering up there, yelling. So I convinced myself to go back up the steps and see what I could do. Well, we had a guy, he was a corporal. He come running in about that time, and the whole stairway had been blown out, and there's no way really to get up that second floor. And of course they were hollering, they were dead wounded up there. He scaled the wall and got up there and started hollering, "We need medics." Well, a bunch of medics come running in with their stretchers, and we passed them up, and they wondered how they could get the wounded and all down. So 2 or 3 of us thought about our wire on the reels outside, and we ran out there and just pulled the line in and let them cut off however much they needed to tie to the 4 shafts of a stretcher. And that's how we got the wounded down. Well, I had 2. One was our Jeep driver, and one was just one of the old wire crew that had been around for a while. He'd gotten killed outside by the bombing. It was one of the greatest battles that my division was in.
I had one that I called Pappy Mars. He was 34 years old, and I carried his pack for him a lot of the times on those mountains up there. He couldn't do it. I don't know how he ever got drafted. He was 34 and had a family, I think with 5 kids. How he ever got drafted, it was a mistake. Anyhow, he got killed. With a big family at home. And of course, the main thing that impacts me was when I first went up to the front to join the outfit. They put us into a company, and the company commander took us over on the ridge and says, "Dig in here, dig in here." Well, that ridge that he dug us in on was facing the enemy. And the next morning, there was an 88 over across the way there on the other mountain. Pulled a point-blank blast in one of the foxholes, about 4 up from me. And these boys I had just got to know. In other words, we all come up together to join the outfit. So it was quite a shocker. Quite a shocker. I cried. I'm sorry. I'm glad it's past, all of it.
Okay. That he doesn't talk about.
That's the sad part. And these men come home, and a lot of them are never the same, never. And a lot of them carry these things with them like Tom, and they don't want to talk about it, but they know they should. That breaks my heart.
It was just chaotic. Most of the Italians must have been sympathetic to our side, but they had been forced by Mussolini to join And the Germans had already decided they had taken over and was in charge in Italy. And so the people, down through history, they've just been under the control of so many different people. But they really were sympathetic to the American-British side. So when we took over Rome, they just went, wow, we couldn't even go through town. The crowd would stop the truck and they'd jump on with wine and the women hugging us and, just crazy. And of course, especially us kids from rural and had never, it was quite something for us,
I tell you, they hid their food, their cheese, their wine, good stuff. They'd bury it in the ground to hide it from the German. And then when we came in, they would go out and dig it up and give it to us freely. The wine, they had the white wine and red wine, Bianco and Russo, and plenty of cheese and salami. And a little word about that salami.
They issued me a Jeep to run the kitchen by. So I took that Jeep and I run down to Rose.
Well, when Dad first met Mom, it was love at first sight. But not long after that, he had to go back on the line. And in the Italian military campaign, we had soldiers who were, in Dad's particular division, were all draftees. And these men were very brave and very courageous, and they fought Germans that did not have any intention of giving up. There were elite panzer groups, elite paratroop groups. They fought in mountain, mud, snow, rain, under horrendous conditions, along with the fact that they were part of the 313th Combat Engineers, and they had to pave the way for the soldiers to get through.
In other words, they had some of their crack outfits in there. And we were supposed to keep them tied up so they couldn't go to the rescue of the German armies down into Europe.
He was injured severely in the hospital, stationed near where she was. When he appeared back in her life, she was very surprised and obviously very happy. You can look at their pictures and you can see exactly why they were attracted to each other.
Well, I could see why Fred Camp wanted to stay.
He had enough rough understanding of basic Italian that he could communicate with her much more than she had the understanding of English.
He started figuring out not long after that how he could get back to the area where Mom lived, even though he was going to be going back fighting during the war. But my dad, being the character that he is, he was going to find a way to make it work.
At one time, the 88th Division had charge of all the prisoners of war in Italy in different locations.
Kind of found out right away there that we had several German POWs that was working in the kitchen. And well, I found out right off that they pretty well knew what they was doing, and I was kind of doing as I pleased, And then I'd catch we had military traffic from there from Florence down through Montecatini area, because that was the main vessel on the road system. And I'd go down there. I went down one day and I walked from there over to Borgo Bugiano, and I went to her house, and her mother came out, and of course I inquired where was Rosanna. She's up this little side road there visiting somebody. She said, I'll go get her. And I was sitting there waiting, and here she come a-running.
In Mom's situation, they didn't know from one minute to the next really what was going to happen to them, because the area was overrun by the Nazis, and so Mussolini's henchmen were always around too.
I can understand it could be a very exciting time for Fred and Rose. The love for each other grew rapidly.
I could say enough for Italian to get it across, you know. And I told her we was going to get married in Florence or on the compound, just to make sure that she understood. I explained to her in some way or other. That's it now. We be holding hands, and when I squeeze it, you say I do. And that's what we got by with.
I think my mom exhibited a kind of bravery, and Dad did too when they met, because at the time she'd been looking for hope, but she hadn't really thought of that a young soldier from on the other side of the ocean would be the answer to her prayers.
And the Germans cared so much for Fred that they baked a wedding cake for him. Even though the Germans were their enemies, they loved Fred because Fred took care of them once it was in his charge.
She couldn't speak any English, really. I said, wow, okay, they're man and wife. I guess hand gestures or whatever. Maybe that's a good thing. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble now.
Love is a common language.
He was a hot-looking GI, and she was a hot-looking Italian girl. They couldn't speak a lick of English, and we know why they got married.
I was in the Po Valley, right there in the Po River, waiting with a bunch of prisoners of war when I found out the war was over. I guess. I didn't hear any loudspeakers announcing it or anything. It got to us through the grapevine. They were throwing their hats, everything, throwing it up in the air. And the prisoners of war didn't care. They were going home. That was what we was doing, was transporting them back to Germany for discharge. And we run trains up through the Brenner Pass into Germany, transporting those POWs home for discharge. They were young, middle-aged, old, and they were very friendly. They put me in the boxcar with 40 of them for 3 days. Well, one of them spoke English probably better than I did. And when I'd get tired of standing guard, I'd just hand my carbine to him and say, you stand guard. You didn't have to worry about them running away. They knew they were going home. So they were just as happy as they could be.
They found Mussolini hanging upside down, I believe, and his mistress and some other of the officers and all that was with him on the square in this town up in northern Italy. He was captured following a German unit trying to escape the war, and he was found by these partisans.
They had hung him up at Lake Como and everything, so I wasn't involved in it at all, the execution of it.
We were on the road behind our troop one morning, and we were just told to pull over on the side of the road and wait. And we did, sat there not knowing what was going on, till finally the word came back, the war's over. So we went to the next little town, took the first empty hotel we could find, and set up headquarters. Well, here come General Fry back to his old unit. And he says, I want a detail. I want them in new uniforms. You can't shine these old combat boots, which you see there like this, but I want them clean, new uniforms. Says, I want a detail to accept the surrender of a whole battalion of Germans. He went in there with, I think it was 2 Jeeps and 1 weapons carrier with all that he took. The Jeeps was full of officers, but he wanted a few of us enlisted men with spit and polish, even issued us cigars of all things, to go with him. Well, here we go up And when we got into this valley, the valley of Cavalese, here's the Germans with their weapons walking the streets. Just needless to say, we was a little bit leery, but we pull into the headquarters there, the biggest motel in the center of town. There's a town square, the German flag flying, a German soldier goose-stepping, walking the beat. Colonel Fry gets out. I almost get emotional thinking about this, but to me that was really the finalization, so to speak, that the war was really over. Because it was a little bit upsetting, just 3 or 4 vehicles with armed Germans all around you, you know. But anyway, before he even went and accepted the surrender of these officers lined up, he goes over with the American flag, makes that soldier run down that German flag, run up the American flag, made him salute it American style and not Heil Hitler style that he was doing, and to start walking the beat instead of goose-stepping, walking it like we did. Then he went up and accepted the surrender. That, to me, was the most dramatic moment, you might say, of the whole war. But anyway, we enlisted men sat on the porch and smoked our cigars and looked important while they went in to arrange their surrender.
She was up there the day I was fixing to leave, and I was on a truck. She standing out there, and we went away. And that's the last I seen her for 6 months. They finally got enough war brides to assemble them on one ship.
The adventure that she must have gone through when he left, and she had to start making preparations and all the things that go through the military, jump through the hoops to get home.
And then she boarded that ship with 99 other Italian war brides. And these were ladies that had married men from all over the United States. But Mom still didn't know any English. So just to show how brave Mom was, besides the fact, here's an 18-year-old pulling up roots from Tuscany, Italy, and going all the way across the Atlantic, to America and all the way down to Little Sand Mountain. She still didn't know any English. So coming through Ellis Island and all the things that she had to do to get to where she was supposed to be with Dad, the other ladies would help her by pinning notes all over her jackets and so forth that had the fairs and the places and all the different things that she needed to know at each stop. And so that took care of her.
She was afraid I wasn't going to be there. Well, I was kind of curious about whether you'd be on the train or not.
My grandfather was an old Methodist circuit riding preacher, and I was raised very, very strict. So I'll have to say that my fraternization with the women was just purely talk with them, and I had several stories I can tell you of 2 or 3 that I got to know that thought that I was going to come back and get them, but I was already engaged to what turned out to be my future wife.
So I'm the only one left, and I have been more than lucky all of my life. I have lived a charmed life.
The Army becomes your family, people you serve with, and friends that you develop those great bonds, and you want to see it through.
Well, I was tore up after the war, losing friends, being away from home. And when I finally got away from it, I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't talk about it to my parents, to my brothers, or anybody else. Most of it has faded from my mind. Mount Grande, where I got my piece of shrapnel, sticks out in my mind. Montecatino, where I got my R&R from, sticks out. But those other little villages in town that we fought through, I don't remember them. Don't want to.
I am alive. I made it. I'm still alive. You could have heard a pin drop. Nobody hooped or hollered or nothing. In other words, I know what my feeling was. I'm gonna survive all this.
I wasn't there very long. I got shipped back and put me on a freighter on my way to the Pacific. My friend Harry Truman dropped the bomb, and the boat turned around and headed for Virginia. I was going to Japan for the invasion of Japan. That's what happened.
See how blessed we've been. Unbelievable.
And the greatest day of all was when I met this young lady.
Oh yeah, Rose and I were married 71 years. When I think back and I say we got along just fine and I don't know how. I don't know, we just seemed to be meant to be, you know. And she never questioned it, and neither did I.
My mother is Lorretta Segars, and she's written a book about the love story of my grandparents meeting in Italy at the time my grandfather was in World War II serving over there.
Part of his life he was a soldier, part of his life he was a farmer, part of his life he was a deacon at the church. He kind of transformed with the nation.
The red is for the blood that flows in places we've forgotten. The white resembles innocence. In some ways we've been lost in. The blue, it stands for vigilance and holding fast to righteousness. But have we lost our way? The stars are for remembering the glory and the victory, where proudly we can say, oh. This is freedom. This is freedom. Where strength and confidence collide along the straight and narrow. When peace is found in sacrifice by patriots and heroes, where grace abounds and evil dies, truth resounds above the lies. It's only found one way, and here we are today. This is freedom. Beyond our institutions. If this is a reality, then where are the solutions? A place where we can stand and sing the worship of our risen King without regret or shame. The hope for life eternally.